All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Math Made Easy with Terry in 10 minutes. Okay, so today we're going to go straight to domain and range. So we're going to dive into it, okay? But before that, I want to remind us about functions where I said for an input, okay, you go through the argument or the manipulation of a function, okay, and it's going to give you what? The y. Does that make sense? All right. And I told you that this is the input, the x is the input, the manipulation is what? The function, and y is the what? The output. All right. Now, before I start, okay, so in this video, what I want to do is that I want to just introduce the concept. All right. So I'm going to introduce it, try to make some definition and terms, and I'm going to start with domain. All right. Then introduce domain. Then the next video, we're gonna dive into domain, what domain is. Then after domain, the next video will be on range. But basically here, I want to just introduce the terms of domain and range and maybe briefly introduce domain and stuff like that. So what is a domain? So the first thing is for domain, okay? So domain is all the input numbers of X, okay? So there are keywords you need to keep in mind. So they are all X. So that is when I say X, they are all the input number of X. The next word to keep in mind is that all the input number that are allowed. Okay. So that means all the input number of X that are allowed that you can plug into the function. Okay. So all the input number of this X that are allowed that I can plug into the function, and the function can process it. Okay, so the function can process it. Now, this is the three most important things to know. When you talk about domain, so it's all the values of X, so you can say all the inputs, okay? You can say all the inputs if you want to, okay? So all the input numbers, or I can write it as all the input numbers, if that will make it easy for you. The input numbers. Okay? So the domain is all the input numbers that we are allowed to plug into our function. Hence, the function can process it. Is that making sense? Now, but this is different from the range. Okay? When we talk about the range, it's completely different. Okay? Now, the range is a collection of all the y's. Okay? It's a collection of all the number of y's. Okay? That means a collection of all the outputs. So in this case, it's all the y's in this case. So that means all the outputs. So a collection of all the output numbers that corresponds to the domain. Okay, so the keyword is that it has to correspond. Okay, so it's not just all possible outputs. No, all the outputs that corresponds to the what? To the domain. Okay, so it has to correspond to the domain. So remember, I told you in the previous video that a function, this must have one input that give you one output. So now the collection of all the allowed inputs, okay, is called the domain, and the collection of all the allowed, the corresponding outputs because of the input, does that make sense? It's called the range. Now, some textbooks will call this range codomain. So in some textbook, you might see it referred to as codomain, okay? And it's still the same thing. Okay. So many questions you will encounter will ask you to find the domain and the range, okay? So what does this mean? And I'm going to look at this individually. So I'm going to first start with domain, okay? Then after domain, I'm going to move over quickly and talk about the range, all right? So I'm going to start first with domain. I'm just going to introduce the domain briefly here, but in the next video, I'm going to dive into domain more. Then after that, I'm going to talk about range. Is that okay? So when we talk about domain, so when a question asks you to find domain, so remember I told you already that domain is all the input numbers that is allowed that the function can process. Okay, so when we ask you to find the domain, what we're just trying to tell you is that you should find all the values of x, all right, that can be plugged in, and the function can process it. Okay, so that means it's basically saying like all the possible permissible inputs for it. So for instance, just a quick example. If you have y is equal to 1 over x, for instance. So you see that all the values of x, I can put x to be 1. Okay. So if x is equal to 1, it will be 1 over 1, and that'll give me 1. If x is equal to 2, it's fine. It's 1 over 2, and that'll give me 1 over 2. Can you see? The function can process it. If x is equal to minus 5, okay? If x is equal to minus 5, it's going to be 1 over minus 5, and the answer is going to be minus 1 over 5. Can you see? The function can process it. Now, but if x is equal to 0, okay? Now press this in your calculator, 1 over 0. What do you think it will give you? If you put it in your calculator, you will see something like math error. Does that make sense? So that means this cannot be processed. So that means all these are the allowed inputs, all the values of x, all possible values of x are the allowed inputs, but except x to be equal to 0 is not what? Allowed. Is this making sense? So every other thing is allowed except x is equal to 0. So I won't go deeper into this than what I've talked about. Okay. So next video, I'm going to talk about I'm going to pick domain. I'm going to dive into it. I'm going to talk about the interval notation. I'm going to talk about the set notation and how to write it and how to determine it. Okay. But basically, what I wanted to just aim in this video is to define what domain is. So domain is all the input number of x that are allowed that you can plug into the function, and the function can process it. Now, while the range is a collection of all the numbers of y that can correspond to the numbers of the domain, okay? And I also talked about, I give a brief example about a domain. So for instance, in this function, y is equal to 1 of x, s can be anything. S can be 50, 100, 1 million, 2.5 million, except what? 0. So that means all other numbers except 0 is the what? The domain. So that means in this function here, it can allow any other number for x except what? 0. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop here. All right. So I'm going to see you in the next video. We're going to dive into domain, and we're going to see what are the rules of domain, how do you play around with it, and how do you determine the domain, how do you write a set notation, and how do you determine which numbers is the right one. All right. All right, so I'm going to see you in the next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share as well. All right, see you soon. I'll see you in the next video.